Type 7 U-boat is actually a bit on the small side. It's developed from the so-called UB submarine, one of the smaller submarines of the First World War.
The ocean contains secrets that can lie dormant for decades. In 1944, a German U-boat disappeared beneath the surface and was never heard from again. 50 men were lost, families had questions that went unanswered, and the Navy only returned an empty silence. Nothing came to light for 66 years, until divers chanced upon a mangled shadow resting deep in the Bay of Genoa. Half buried in mud, its bow pointing upward as if in a last desperate gasp for air, U-455 lay there. What had transpired in the final moments? Enemy fire, a mine, or some treachery at the hands of the waters they depended on? This is the sad and haunting story of U-455. In the Second World War, few military instruments evoked the degree of terror that German U-boats did. Called the Grey Wolves, the submarines were promoted in Nazi propaganda as the silent sea predators, pursuing Allied convoys with precision death. They were presented as symbols of German invincibility, gliding undetected under the surface, firing torpedoes, and disappearing before reprisal could catch up. To the Allies, the very word U-boat conjured pictures of blazing ships, sailors desperately clinging to rafts, and convoys broken under the cover of darkness. But beneath the propaganda, the existence within a U-boat was hardly romantic. Those who manned them were sometimes referred to as an elite breed, but what that actually signified was endurance, the ability to endure conditions most would find intolerable. A typical Type 7C boat like U-455 had about 50 men packed into a steel tube slightly more than 220 feet long. They existed for weeks in the dark, with the rumble of machinery always present, surrounded by the smell of oil, sweat, diesel, and dirty bodies. Fresh water was scarce and reserved for use by machinery or cooking, so men went unwashed for entire operations. There was no privacy, bunks were double-shifted, and meals were taken alongside torpedoes that doubled as stowage racks. Each mission was a combination of deadly quiet and instant fear. Hours would drag on in near silence punctuated only by the low rumble of the engines and the softly spoken words of sailors, until the sonar started to detect the feared pings of Allied destroyers patrolling overhead. Then the submarine would dive deeper, the air hotter and thicker, condensation running down the walls, as men stood frozen, holding their breath, as depth charges shook the surrounding sea. Each explosion shook the boat hard, and every man on board understood that the next one could collapse the hull and kill them all. The psychological cost was tremendous. However, these men were informed they were Germany's best fighters, soldiers who did not walk on the ground but stalked the depths to attack the heart of their foes. And it seemed so for a while. U-boats ravaged shipping lanes across the Atlantic, bringing Britain to the verge of starvation and menacing its weapons, fuel, and provisions. Hitler referred to them as the trump card, the weapon that would shatter the Allies. Crews became heroes in propaganda films, and commanders became national heroes. Into this environment came U-455, a Type 7C commissioned into service in 1941. She initially cruised the cold seas of Norway, stalking Allied ships. Those initial patrols netted little but frustration, weeks of cramped suffering with no victories to reward the pain. U-455 was finally sent back to the Atlantic, where she finally experienced success, sinking workmen and another ship. Those triumphs brought the crew the pride of hunters, men who had taken blood in the huge, cruel sea. They claimed their victories, but tides were changing. By 1943, Allied technology had advanced, radar, sonar, long-range planes, and improved depth charges made the seas killing grounds. The hunters were rapidly becoming prey. Dozens of U-boats failed to return, disappearing without a trace on the vastness of the sea. And yet U-455 carried out her assignments, torn between pride and danger, between propaganda and bitter reality. But soon enough, she would be sent into one of the war's most deadly gauntlets, the Mediterranean, across the Strait of Gibraltar. By January 1944, the Allies had gained momentum in the Mediterranean. North Africa and Italy were in Allied hands, and German command had to depend on submarines to interfere with supply lines that were provisioning the advancing forces. Among the boats chosen was U-455. Her assignment was easy on paper but almost suicidal in practice, to sneak into the Mediterranean and cruise down the Italian coast, sinking Allied convoys. To reach there, she had to travel through the Strait of Gibraltar, one of the most dangerous channels in the world for a submarine. The strait was something more than a slim channel, it was a fortress. A mere 9 miles across, it was permanently under Allied observation, with patrols, planes, radar, and minefields poised to annihilate invading submarines. Trying to pass was akin to threading a needle in the dark and being pursued. Most of the U-boats did not return, their fate betrayed only by drifting oil slicks and wreckage floating to the surface. For U-455, the transit was it all. Without it, the mission could not be accomplished, with it, death was inevitable. One cold winter evening in January, U-455 closed hatches and disappeared beneath the surface. For 40 hours of excruciating torture, the submarine inched along the ocean floor, sonar pings ringing out overhead. Inside, the air became noxious with carbon dioxide, sweat, and diesel smoke. Men perspired in silence, any clang or slip possibly betraying them. Allied destroyers patrolled overhead, poised to drop depth charges, and aircraft swept the sea surface with searchlights. The crew endured it all, choking and famished, until at last, against hope, they came into the Mediterranean. They had navigated the impossible transit. But their fortune did not last. Shortly thereafter, U-455 was ordered to cruise the Ligurian and Tyrrhenian seas, interfering with Allied shipments into Italy. The Mediterranean was no longer an open hunting ground by then, though. Allied planes dominated the skies, destroyers prowled the oceans, and minefields blanketed coastlines. U-455 entered waters that were graveyard for submarines. Her last message was ordinary, reporting orders without hint of distress. Then, silence. No distress call, no plea for assistance. The submarine just disappeared. The Kriegsmarine officially reported U-455 missing at a later date. Families were given tough, formal letters, harshly cold in their acknowledgement of loss without explanation, leaving only void. Rumors abounded: had the submarine hit a mine, been sent to the depths by aircraft, or died of mechanical failure? With no wreckage, there were only questions. For decades, U-455 was a specter, a haunting presence in naval documents and family lore alike. It took 66 years, until 2010, for divers from Genoa to discover her final resting place. Half buried on the seafloor, while pointing towards the surface in a frozen battle for survival, U-455 had at last been discovered. It chilled divers to see, shut hatches indicated no attempt at escape had been made. The crew remained within, their bodies trapped in steel. U-455 was not merely a wreck, it was a grave, a silent tomb containing 50 men. Experts verified the wreck as U-455 by means of archives, patrol reports, and construction specifications. Inspection uncovered grim details: the periscope was frozen in the upright position, indicating the submarine had been operating close to the surface when tragedy occurred. The stern was broken, proof of an explosion, but whether from a mine, a depth charge, or an internal blast was yet to be known. The sea had given up part of its secret, though not all. For families, the news was both heartbreaking and reassuring. It told them that their loved ones had died together, but also provided a site to grieve, a grave at sea. The wreck itself spoke for itself: upward tilting bow, broken stern, closed hatches, all presenting a haunting picture of a desperate, ultimate struggle to stay alive. Once the ocean's monster, the grey wolf now rested broken, still, and humanized. No longer predator, but a cemetery of young men entangled in a harsh destiny. Among the voices which lived to narrate fragments of the tale were 2 sailors remobilized before U-455's last mission. Gerhard Schwartz and Helmut Spitzer survived by luck, taken out of the crew before its last journey. Later in life, Schwartz stood on Genoa's beach, lamenting comrades buried beneath the waves. He recalled their laughter, their songs, their meals together alongside torpedoes. Spitzer remembered the hunts on the Atlantic, victories, exhaustion, claustrophobia, and the terrible understanding by 1943 that U-boats were no longer hunters, but hunted. For them, U-455 was not just history but memory, friendship, and loss. For us, it remains a story, of steel and silence, of men trapped in fate, of secrets the sea held for decades until revealing them in fragments. And even now, U-455 asks a haunting question: why does it still matter today? Orders that brought silence having weathered Gibraltar, U-455 entered the Mediterranean, but its stay was temporary. By February of 1944, fighting in Italy was escalating. The Allies had made landfall at Anzio, south of Rome, and were waging a desperate battle to widen their beachhead. To the Germans, it was important to cut off the supply stream sustaining the Allied bridgehead. That job fell to submarines such as U-455. The instructions for U-455 were blunt and unyielding: cruise the waters off the Ligurian coast, off Genoa, and attack any Allied vessels that may be encountered. It was a task as perilous as it was required. By now, the Mediterranean was securely under Allied air control, with patrol aircraft roaming the heavens and warships crossing the ocean. For U-455, every surfacing to recharge batteries was a gamble. Nevertheless, duty pushed them on. The last report ever received from U-455 arrived in early February. Radio messages reported it was heading for its patrol grounds. Then, not a word. Silence. No distress call, no word, no explanation. 50 men disappeared into the Mediterranean, leaving nothing but unanswered questions behind. Families waited, anxiously hoping for news that never materialized. To the German Navy, U-455 was declared missing, lost. For decades, its tale appeared complete. But the sea had not forgotten. Discovery in the depths. It is now 2010. Off Genoa, a group of Italian divers investigated the seabed about 400 feet beneath the surface. There, half buried in silt and clothed in phantom nets, lay the unmistakable shape of a U-boat. Its bow was directed upward as if suspended mid-surface, its stern shattered and crumpled on the seabed. It was U-455, preserved by years of silence. The divers were awed by the spooky sight. The submarine appeared less mechanical and more like a tomb. Hatches were tightly sealed, implying crew members had never managed to escape. The nets that shrouded its hull only served to enhance the impression of confinement, as if the sea itself had plotted to keep the vessel in its clutches. Forensic examination of the wreck indicated that an explosion had disabled the U-boat, possibly because it had hit a mine or experienced an internal accident with its own munitions. No one could be sure, however. The queries re-emerged with even more power: what occurred in the last seconds? Was there warning to the crew, or did it arrive all at once as the hull was ripped asunder? The quiet of the wreck told all, but not in any language men could decipher. The tomb beneath the sea. The realization that made the find even more eerie was that U-455 was not only a wreck, it was a grave of war. Among the iron coffin were the remains of 50 men, sailors who had lived, fought, and eventually died side by side in the cramped space of their submarine. Italian authorities had the site gazetted as a protected grave, protecting the dead so they would not be disturbed. For those families who had waited for decades in vain, the news